Welcome, everybody. It's great to see people all starting to join. We're expecting quite a number of people on the call today. So as we will take the first few minutes just for people to arrive, if you could, in the chat, just put in your name and where you are calling in from, so we can get an idea of where everybody is today. That will be really great. Awesome. So if we look here, we've got Austria and Finland and Budapest and Canada and Spain, Costa Rica, Ecuador, South Africa. So it's too many. Brazil, Bangalore. Great. Honduras, Portland, Sweden, the UK, Botswana, Los Angeles. So great to see so many people online. I see Salim is here. So I'm gonna quickly just get the screen going. So with my new favorite picture of Salim.
For God's sakes, my collar's turned up. My jacket's crumpled. You couldn't find a better photograph?
No, I love your picture. I mean, your face. So it's fine. So great. So yeah, a big welcome to everybody who's joining us today. We're really excited to hear what Salim has to share, as well as to have time for people to to ask any questions to Salim as well as the team. And so I think it's most best if I hand over to Salim to kick us off. So Salim, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Kevin. And thanks a heap for setting all this up. Can you hear me okay, first of all? Yes, no, good.
Yes.
So I'm going to run through these fairly quickly, and then I'll go through all of them, I think, and then let's open it up to a broader discussion. One by one will probably mean we get drowned in rat holes. If you have questions about any of them, let's deal with it in one lump. And comments and disagreements and suggestions welcome, because the more this is a conversation, I think the richer it'll be. I'm going to be very hard-hitting and fairly blunt, unlike my normal self. And I'm going to say a couple of things that are going to be quite provocative, because I think we need it today. I think this is a time where we can't mess around. We have a pretty desperate situation going on globally in an environment where the world is kind of in a hell of a mess, and our leadership can't navigate this very well. At a very umbrella level, let me kick off with 4 observations about the world, and then we'll drill into this. In the 15th century, we had the Gutenberg moment, and the printing press changed the world fundamentally. And we now call that a Gutenberg moment because of the fundamental transformation that had in society by democratizing literature. Actually, it took 100 years to fully absorb the printing press.
I think I'm just struggling to...
Folks, can you mute if you're not speaking? Which would be great. Okay, and it turns out that was the most violent century in the history of humanity. And so new technology injections cause huge societal issues. I would argue today that we have 20 Gutenberg moments hitting us all at the same time. because blockchain changes the world fundamentally. The printing of the solar energy changes the world fundamentally. Drones change the world fundamentally. And so I think we have an unbelievable forcing function via technology. The second observation is that this is breaking every institution by which we run the world. If you've heard me speak, you will hear me say often that every mechanism we use to run the world is out of date. Education is broken, journalism is broken, intellectual property is broken, etc. In fact, I can't spot a single institution that survives this transition, this onslaught. The third is that our current leadership globally, especially on the political side, simply is not set up for this. All of our leadership training today is incremental, status quo, linear, local, etc., etc., and the train is pulling into Black Swan Central. And the final observation is most of the action is happening kind of at a local level as opposed to a global level. Certainly the implementation. So, and if I could if I could hack the title, rather than 10 exponential opportunities, I would actually frame them as 10 exponential obligations. I think we are duty bound for our children and for the future to really go after the future that we want. So let's get into it. Let's get into the first slide. So I picked these 10. I've picked 3 or 4 technology ones, 3 or 4 corporate transformation ones, and 3 or 4 personal transformation. On the technology, we've categorized all of this as exponential regulatory. Consider that almost all policy is formulated defensively and reactively. You know, bankers go along and all of a sudden we have Bitcoin and we're trying to figure out what to do with it. And the challenge is that takes a very long time to decide policy. So something like passenger drones come along, we have them, the technology's there, but how do you now navigate the regulatory could take a decade. And in the meantime, we lose all of the value that could be gained from implementing that technology. One of the most dramatic examples is the FDA in the US, which regulates medical drugs, etc. The FDA will regulate for safety, not efficacy. So if a drug will kill 10 people, they'll ban the drug, even though if it may save 1 million lives. And when you add up all of the lives that could have been saved but weren't because of this policy, it adds up to literally in the millions. And let me make a very, every city in the world has massive traffic issues, and we are not able to deal with this in a clean way. And passenger drones would alleviate a huge amount of issues. And I'll be very, very blunt here. If we had authorized passenger drones in the last 5 years when the technology is ready, Kobe Bryant would be alive today. Because helicopters have one blade and you have human error and etc. And drones don't have either of those issues. They have multiple failure modes because if one rotor goes bad, there's 5 or 6 others and they self-pilot. And so I'm using that example very provocatively, obviously, but this is very real. It's very defensible, right? So I think the approval of these technologies is really, really important, just as a general framing. We freak out that somebody may use it negatively, but a bad actor is not going to listen to the regulation anyway. So current safety structures, all they do is stop the positive use cases, the negative go ahead anyway, right? So there's a case for just saying, let anybody do anything and we'll police the negative use cases. All right, next one. So the next technology is blockchain. I think this brings up 2 interesting possibilities. We have for the first time a self-auditing system where you don't need oversight. And this has never been possible before in human history. The value of the blockchain is the fact that it's immutable and permanent and can't be messed with. We were talking to Hernando de Soto, the prominent economist who's done a lot of work on property titles, and he made a very incredible statistic. It turns out if you put land titles on the blockchain. Just that, just put global land titles on a blockchain so you had transparent view as to who owns what. And it couldn't be messed with. The global real estate market is about $280 trillion. Just putting land titles on the blockchain would release about $20 trillion into the global economy. And that is just a staggering number. And that's just land titles. Forget all the other areas where we could apply blockchain type technologies. I think of blockchain as the internet in 1995. You can see enormous promise, but you can't quite see the use cases of where it's going to go. And the power of this will become clear, I think, in the next little while. The challenge, of course, is the corresponding, what we call the immune system problem. When you try anything disruptive in a legacy environment, the antibodies kind of attack you. And I think just try getting a government to say that they're not authoritative of who owns what land, that the blockchain is, and you'll see what I mean. They'll go, no, we can't do this. It just wouldn't be right. We really need to be authoritative, et cetera, et cetera. But this will happen. It's just it will take longer than we really want. But the opportunity, and again, I'll frame it as the obligation, is immense. Okay, so blockchain, I think, is the second one. Third, let's go to the next one, CRISPR. So it turns out that bacteria don't get viruses. And for a long time, researchers were trying to figure out how do bacteria protect themselves against viruses. And it turns out bacteria have evolved this mechanism called CRISPR-Cas9, which allows them to edit their own genome and edit viruses out of themselves. We have now reverse engineered this, and we can now edit the human genome about as easily as you can edit software. And the implications of this are very profound. A human being is about 40 trillion cells, each governed by the DNA, which is the program that tells each cell what to do. And if you can edit that, essentially a human being is now a software engineering problem. And this becomes incredibly interesting for solving cancer, for dealing with all sorts of autoimmune diseases. There are 10,000 monogenic diseases that cannot be treated today that we could just handle with CRISPR. It's extremely inexpensive, reasonably accurate. Every wet lab in the world is playing with this, and we're going to see some incredible things come out as a result of this. So CRISPR, I think, is the third one. Again, the regulatory is enormously challenging because how do you regulate this stuff is incredibly difficult. All our classic mechanisms of regulatory are top-down oversight with and then enforcement of some kind. And when you can't do top-down oversight, say in blockchain or CRISPR or anywhere where there's bottom-up democratization, it breaks all the regulatory. So our current reaction is ban it, and then we take a couple of decades to figure out where it'll go. Next one. And this final one on the technology side is energy abundance. Already we have the inklings of energy abundance. It's pretty clear that by the end of this decade, we will be able to deliver all of our energy needs with solar. And this is an unbelievable transition, and it will happen. It doesn't matter what people say or do, what policies they implement. The doubling pattern is there. Solar energy panels are doubling roughly every 22 months in their price performance, and they've been doing this for 40 years. And so we ride that curve, and you have incredible opportunities on energy abundance. There are two inflection points that are very profound here. One is about 3 years ago, it became cheaper to build a new solar energy facility than a fossil fuel facility if you're doing power generation, okay? So as of 3 years ago, almost all new energy generation is has been solar energy. Somebody's asking about fusion. It's one of those, the fusion is we're almost there. It's one of those things we're always 5 years away from fusion. So we'll see how we get there. But solar energy is definitely very much here. So I mentioned the one inflection point 3 years ago. Last year, we hit a second inflection point that's even more profound. As of last year and as of today, it is now cheaper to build a new solar energy facility than to run an existing fossil fuel. So now it's economically viable, it's economically more interesting to shut down your fossil fuel and build a new solar from scratch, because the CapEx plus the OpEx is cheaper than just the OpEx. And that's an incredible, incredible thing. And now the big challenge is storage. How do you store all that energy? I actually proposed a prize at the last Visioneering at X Prize of off-grid storage at about 50 times cheaper than the current energy storage prices. If you did that, then you could collect solar, have this off-grid energy storage, and then you're done. Because if you have solar and storage, everything changes. By the way, if you have solar and storage at a local level, note that the business model of every electrical utility in the world disappears, right? So some interesting disruptions happening there. And as a result, the utilities are kind of plugging down on this. There are two regions that are rather interesting here. One is Spain and one is Florida. And in both of those, it is illegal to put solar panels on your own roof because the government gets so much tax from the utility, they can't afford citizens to have their own solar panels. So this is obviously not a viable structure long-term. And Florida especially, because it's the sunshine state. So the irony there is quite profound. Okay, next one. So those are the 3 or 4 technology ones, and I could go on for a long time about the technology side, right? Let's move to the organizational ones. In the same model as every societal structure is being affected, every business in the world is being affected. Every organization structure in the world is being affected. And in the world is changing so quickly, how do you frame and form and organize yourselves around this? Now, our old model for organization was top-down pyramid hierarchical structures, designed for efficiency, designed for predictability, and very good in a scarcity environment, right? So if you had scarcity, a top-down military-style pyramid structure was great. But as we move the world to abundance, that model actually doesn't work very well. Jerry Mikulski, one of our key people in our world, has made the very profound comment that scarcity is abundance minus trust, right? I'm just going to repeat that. Scarcity is abundance minus trust. And as we move the world to abundance, we're kind of having a tough time with that equation. How do we scale trust? And think about this idea. Almost every business in the world is geared around selling scarcity. In fact, for the last several thousand years, if you didn't have scarcity, you literally didn't have a business. So now we need to create a completely new model for organizations that are geared towards abundance. And that's where exponential organizations come in and our overall paradigm. We've seen over the last decade that there's a completely new breed of organization appearing where we can scale the organization structure as fast as we can scale technology. And the key to an exponential organization, the #1 characteristic that they all have, is what we call a massive transformative purpose, an MTP. We've been talking about this since about 2012, and now it's becoming a big buzzword that we should have purpose-driven organizations and investors are investing in purpose-driven corporations, et cetera, et cetera. Much of it is marketing bump, but at least they're heading in that direction. It's kind of ironic when a global energy firm that has been denying climate change for 6 decades suddenly goes, "We're all green," right? It's kind of amazing, but at least something's happening there. So getting a massive transformative purpose for your organizations is absolutely critical. Next one. The next one is metabolism. What do I mean by this? Jack Welch, in his annual report in the year 2000, made a very profound comment, which is, he said that the minute, this was the GE annual report, shareholders report, and he said the minute the metabolism of your organization is slower than the outside world, you're dead. The only question is when. And you could argue today that almost every big company, big organization in the world, certainly even especially in the public sector, the metabolism is slower than the outside world. And so this is a huge challenge around this. We need to increase the metabolism. And how do we do that is we found that if you take on some of the characteristics of EXOs, we can do that. In fact, we have a 10-week sprint that we've found that demonstrably moves leadership culture management thinking 3 years ahead in that 10 weeks. We've done it 30 times with big companies globally, and we now have that capability. It's actually now imperative to transform the metabolism of your organization because it's an existential question. And so there's a set of activities that we can that our community works on to implement these transformations in organizations. Next one. The third one is now, this next set is now about yourself. So we have organizations, we have institutions, and we have people. Those are the main pillars of society or civilization. We talked about society and regulatory, we talked about organizations. Let's talk about what you do as an individual. And these also obviously apply to organizations and institutions also. Number one, become a futurist. I mentioned at the beginning that almost all policy is defensive and reactive, right? There's one country in the world that formulates policy proactively, and that's Singapore. And even then, they do it not, barely. Very cautious, very careful, et cetera, et cetera. There's an unbelievable opportunity for policymakers to look into the future. We know what's coming. Let's formulate policies for drones before they appear so that we know we can take full advantage of the technology. But when you apply that to yourself, you yourself need to become a futurist. You need to get a sense of, okay, what's coming in the world? What doubling patterns should I be tracking? What inflection points should I be looking out for? Where are these technologies and trends intersecting? What labs and companies are doing the most interesting work? And how does that map onto my world? Because if you're not doing that, you're behind the game. Peter Diamandis often says that if you're building a product or service based on today's technology, you're out of date before you hit the market, right? And so we can't afford to be looking backwards anymore. Successful people will be the ones that are looking forward into the future and learning how to do jujitsu with the future. Next one. This one is maybe the most important, which is what is your personal massive transformative purpose? I think in the future we'll be hiring based on alignment of the company's MTP and the individual's MTP. And that's starting to happen already. The younger generation are very purpose-driven, millennials, et cetera, and want to be involved in purpose-driven organizations. Then, of course, you have to manage them, which is a whole other webinar, so let's not get into that. But if you have a personal mission, then you have a North Star. Simon Sinek, who we've talked to a bunch of times, this is the why of why are you alive? What problem do you want to solve on your gravestone at the end of, if we have gravestones by the end of this current set of lifetimes. Now this is a very hard thing. It's very hard to figure out your MTP. And for quite a few years, I was kind of paralyzed by this concept. Like, what is my purpose? I could do anything. I mean, where do I start? And one of my mentors watched this paralysis for a little while and then smacked me around a bit and said, look, just shut up and pick one. Only by picking one and acting on it will you know if it's right or wrong, and then you can course correct, right? So you don't have to get paralyzed by getting it perfect. Pick the thing that gets you. There are two ways of thinking about your personal MTP that are very easy. One, if you had $1 billion, what problem would you go solve? Number two, what gets you up at 6 a.m. excited to work on? What problems get you that excited? And so if you can kind of find, that narrows it down quite considerably, because most problems won't get you up at 6 a.m. To solve, and most problems are not where you might spend $1 billion. But certainly you might find where that intersects. So get your personal MTP and then use that to drive your activities, your path, your future, your filters for what's interesting to you. Next one. This one is so if you pick your personal environment, now you need to transform yourself. And what we mean by this is that if you think about who you are as an individual, there's a bunch of contributing factors that made you who you are today. Your culture, your genetics, your family background, your religion, all of the activities and are archived characteristics of the past, right? And most people, who they are is a function of the past. My dad is bald, and hey, guess what? I'm bald. You know, and therefore I am mostly a function of my past. But as we become a futurist, as you pick a problem, we have the increasing opportunity to craft ourselves for the future. So some people go and get an education for this and say, okay, let me go become expert in something. And what's really interesting today, and I'm going to shift into the education side just for a second, is that almost all education is supply side. You try and become expert in a skill, accounting, whatever, and then you try and sell that skill, basically, right? And so we have almost all of our education is geared towards taking a young child, training them through their early 20s to be ready for the existing job market. Except we don't know what a job looks like in 5 years. What are we teaching them? And all of that supply side stuff worked when the world wasn't changing very quickly. And you could, as John Seeley Brown, who ran Xerox PARC for a while, said, the half-life of a skill used to be about 30 years. But today, the half-life of a skill is about 5 years. So going and learning to be really good at something doesn't give you that much anymore. Today, what will be happening is, what problems are you excited about? And when I advise parents on how to guide their kids, they often say, where should I point him and steer him? And I say, don't give them a skill or point them towards becoming an engineer or accountant. Point them towards what problem do they get excited about. They will then find the technologies, the skills, the capabilities to solve that. And really educating yourself and transforming yourself is really the fundamental starting point for all of this future. Because if subconsciously you're stuck in the past, then everything you do will be stuck in the past, subconsciously, if nothing else. This is the work for most human beings. And I do this late night meaning of life session where we talk about the human condition, which is really finding what is the fundamental reason you're alive in this lifetime, and then bringing that into the surface and expressing that in some way. And when when you're in that mode, when you're in a flow state, or when you're incredibly excited, time kind of slows down. And how can you be in that state for longer and longer times? Stephen Kotler has done an amazing job in The Rise of Superman, modeling and tracking exactly which neurotransmitters do this stuff. But on the more external tactical side, many people go and do an MBA so that they're good at business, right? Well, consider that almost every MBA program in the world teaches you how to build a 20th century organization. In fact, I challenge you to point to an MBA program that teaches you how to build Uber. There just isn't one. And so what we've been trying to offer in our world is tool sets and techniques that allow you to look into the future. And so the work to transform yourself becomes really critical. At the easiest, we had old tools for this, yoga, martial arts, meditation. Then we become exponentially better with NLP techniques like Tony Robbins or landmark education. Then we became better with biofeedback rhythms and understanding the technology side. And now we have ayahuasca, bufo, kambo, and all of these psychedelics that we can take in microdoses to transform ourselves. So we've got the full spectrum now of the mechanical, physical transformation. Now the question is, what's the frameworks intellectually, spiritually, emotionally that will allow you to operate in this new world? So I'm going to pause there. Kevin, back to you. I think I covered all of them, right? Is there any more? I think I did all 10. So happy to kind of open it up to a discussion and see what happens next. Kevin, where do you want to take this? And I think Kevin is muted.
Salim, you had a bonus one, which was go build a
Oh yeah. The bonus one is basically, and I think this might actually be number 10. But the one here is if you want to really take a crack at this, just go build a startup. It's pick your MTP, the problem you want to solve, and go find a community that's relevant. Go put a founding team together, come up with a breakthrough idea. And there's no better way of learning business than to actually building a business. And in fact, I think in the future, an engineering degree won't be, I studied engineering for 4 years. It'll be, I built stuff for 4 years. Here's what I built. Can I have my degree, please? In the same way, at business school, there's no point going and learning about business, especially in a world that's changing so quickly. Go build one. And so I encourage all of you to do that. And I think I'm done.
Awesome. So thanks so much for that, Salim. Unfortunately, it seems like perfect timing that my internet in India here is starting to get a bit shaky. But hopefully everyone can hear me perfectly well. Thanks so much for that. Before we get into questions, I did just want for those of you who are here who are not in our community, and there are a few people who are not in the community, just to give a little bit of a rundown about what we're about. And we really believe we have the opportunity to transform the world for a better future. And that's our NTP as a community. And we see ourselves as the world's leading global EXO transformation ecosystem. And we're doing that by empowering people to actually go out there and build exponential organizations. And so I wanted to share this. Early 2019, our community around the world looked like what you can see on the screen right now. And today, this is what it looks like. We now have members in over 114 countries with 3,400 plus people speaking 33 languages, 310 certified consultants and 207 certified sprint coaches, 118 ambassadors, and over 1,000 people who've gone through the EXO Foundation certification. And it's really exciting to see what's happening, to have conversations. Before this webinar, I had a conversation with community member Darcy, just speaking about how his world has been shifted since joining the community, and it's extremely amazing what we're doing. So I wanted to just quickly share that, and then I wanted to hand over to Yaroslav just to speak a little bit about the certification programs.
That's great, Kevin. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So greetings to everybody. Greetings to all 285 people on this webinar and the other 300 or 400 people who's going to watch the webinar. My name is Yaroslav. I am a Chief Learning Officer. I build and deliver our certification programs. And, it's interesting because the kind of things we are discussing here, there are many topics like this we could be discussing as a community. As Kevin said, we have over 3,400 people in the community. And there could be many webinars like this discussing the things and discussing what is happening. But it's almost like a kind of an exponential fountain. We are tapping into the fountain, but we actually want to, as a community, we want to go farther. We don't want to only be discussing the things, but we actually want to bring these ideas and the kind of things we are discussing here, we actually want to bring it to society. This is why our MTP is transform the world for a better future. It's not just to have transformative conversations ourselves, but actually go out there and actively work with institutions, with organizations, and with people to help them transform and help them to have those kind of conversations, but also to help them adapt their business models, help them to adapt the way they think, and to be able to profit from this, because the fourth industrial revolution is something quite unprecedented for us as humanity. So for this, we have built a set of tools and programs for the more active people who actually want to take these concepts not only for themselves, but they actually want to take them into organizations, into institutions, and want to be actively bringing them to the world. Our main path is the one that you see on the screen. So it's EXO Foundations, EXO Consultant, and EXO Sprint Coach. EXO Foundations is an initial introduction into the concept of exponentiality and how it affects businesses and the world today. EXO Consultant looks into the first book of Salim, learning more about the model and learning how to consult organizations using this model. And EXO Sprint Coach looks at our flagship 10-week process that Salim spoke about and looks at how you can actually guide your clients, how you can guide organizations, but also institutions through a transformation process where they can, in a structured way, think about the future and think what it means for them and what they can do going forward. So these are our 3 programs. We have had about 1,000 people, over 1,000 people go through them last year. It is always very exciting program, not only for us, obviously for us, of course, but we are also measuring the Net Promoter Scores on these programs. And we are getting some amazing results. If any of you know, Net Promoter Score is between -100 and 100. And actually our Net Promoter Score for this year on the EXO Consultant course is 91, and on the Coach course is 80. So anything above 75 should be considered world class. So I am saying this because this was the feedback we have received from people going through these programs, really enjoying themselves, having a great time. In the consultant course, which is actually one that I wanted to speak to you about in detail, we actually have people working with real organizations. They bring a client, or we help them to pick a client, and they work with them for, they have about 2 or 3 hours with them across a course of 4 weeks. And actually over the course of last year, through about 6 or 7 cohorts, we have worked with 300 companies out there and created some amazing results. There have been new businesses founded to disrupt industries. There have been new consulting engagements. There's been a lot of inspiration. We've actually now found out through this program that the EXO model applies to any company out there. We have had a traditional French pastry shop in Belgium applying it. We have had a private high school in China applying it. We have had all kinds of businesses actually being able to apply it. You know, a shop with cameras in South Africa applying and kind of looking into that. So it's been kind of great to see people working with clients. And I just want to finish with one quote that really kind of touched me last week. It was one of our current cohort participants, and she said that she was working with the EXQ survey with a client for a couple of hours. And at the end of those 2 hours, the client kind of said, you know, look at her and say, you know, we know that the world is changing, but we didn't know what to do about this. And we kind of felt like we were trying things, but we were in the dark. We didn't know, you know, what to do. And after the work that we've done with you, we feel like we have a flashlight to actually look at what we can be doing. We know exactly what's happening. We know exactly how to address it. And this is huge for any organization today. So this is the power of our tools. We want to be not only discussion community, but also an action community. And for any of you who are wanting to bring this to the world in a more active way, I highly encourage you to look at our certification programs. We do have a cohort starting next week, which I wanted to tell you about. So you can go to our website and register, or at yaroslavopenexo.com. You can contact me if you have any questions. And I look forward to maybe seeing some of you on our programs and helping you to take that next step in bringing this to the world. Thank you. Over to you, Kevin.
Thanks so much for that, Jaroslav. And it's spring in the background. That looks pretty cool. So thank you so very much. What we will do now is move into a time of questions. If there are people who are interested in the certification, I'll also just share the link in the chat. So please do look up. But we'll move into questions now from folks.
Wait, hold on 1 second. Yaroslav, can you mute? I think the wind is coming through.
Muted, Yaroslav. Kelly says her mind's blown. Maybe it was the wind noise. So if you do have any questions, please do go and put those into the chat right now. I know, Salim, there were questions just around the technologies around energy. I know you're very bullish on solar, but there was a number of people saying, what about other technologies? And we're seeing different technologies pulling out electrons from the air, energy from rain, of course, ocean energy, wind, etc.
So let me just cover that off because there are important questions. There's about 2 or 3 considerations here. One is what we're interested in and what we track more carefully than other areas is where you see an exponential growing technology, where it's doubling in its capability. Because we know from Moore's law and Ray Kurzweil's work that once you have a doubling pattern, it doesn't stop, and you can bet your life on that. By the way, Elon Musk, his methodology for building a company is very, very simple. He looks at a technology that's growing exponentially and doubling on some pattern, looks out 10 years, where will that technology be on a 10-year doubling pattern? And then let's build a company to intercept that curve, whether it's neural links, battery technology, solar, whatever. And look at the success that he's had around that. You have to have the courage to go, that's where it'll be in 10 years and really go for it, which takes a special mindset and a level of craziness that few people have. But the model is very simple. The reason that we focus on solar is just because of the unbelievable upside. Because let's say we can deliver 100% of our world energy needs with solar in 10 years. Let's remember it's doubling every 2 years. That means in 12 years, we can deliver 200%. In 14 years, we deliver 400%. In 16 years, we're delivering 800%. And that just keeps going. So energy, which has been scarce for the entire history of humanity, is about to become abundant. Chile in South America is already generating so much solar, they're giving it to their neighbors for free. Now, wind and tides and hydrogen, et cetera, are all very interesting. The problem is none of them are exponential in the same way. So they'll achieve a great cheap rate, wind farms, et cetera, but solar just keeps going. And now there's a new generation of perovskites, which are new materials that will not even need solar panels that are silicon-based, and therefore we won't need the rare earths that we need today. And so there's some incredible opportunities there. Now the big challenge is the storage side. How do we store energy? And there's a bunch of ways of storing energy: gravity, heat, spin, etc. And lots of people are experimenting with these, and we'll see what comes out. And it'll depend. I think the minute you have solar and storage at the same level of maturity, then that changes the game fundamentally. Think about the resilience of, right now the global security agencies spend a huge amount of time trying to protect the national energy grid or big power plants from hacking and whatever. Now, if you have localized solar and storage, all the security issues go away. In the Philippines now, they're powering themselves with microgrids and sharing that energy. By the way, the poorest countries in the world are the sunniest countries in the world, right? So super interesting as we transfer that paradigm. And so now we're finding that storage is lagging behind the generation by about 5 years, but in about 4 or 5 years, solar will be here, and storage will be here, and it'll be kind of game over. And so just some thoughts around that. And again, my data is kind of iffy here and there, but in general, now the big challenge is how do you cover the base load? And nuclear is an incredible opportunity because we now have thorium reactors that are completely safe and don't need have very low radiation risk, but the politics of it is horrible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, I mean, Bill Gates is really he's putting a lot of effort into safe nuclear for using waste to actually.
Now I'm going to just point out the macro implications here. Think of once you have abundant energy, the entire Middle East collapses, right? The US has to find other reasons to go to war. Every oil-producing country is kind of toast because the cost of the extraction of oil is so expensive. In Canada, where I'm sitting right now, 40% of Canadian exports are oil. So the foundation of the Canadian economy is done in the next decade. And now what do you do? And so there's some huge macroeconomic implications around this.
Absolutely. So we'll turn the question to Angie Carrillo's question saying, we have research on meditation flow, psychedelics, how we can combine this with other how can we combine this with other exponential technologies like CRISPR?
Oh, for God's sakes. All right, let me go full out here. So you imagine a time where there's some interface where I can program my genetics. I can do it with my mind. And so if I want a little bit more functionality in my leg muscles, I basically have a thought methodology where I envision this. Somehow that gets converted into genetic code changes, and that gets sent to my legs, and I can run faster. We're within foreseeable future of something like that. I think where we'll be, what's the big breakthrough is the fact that we can now do what's called fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, where we can actually trap a neuron and watch it as it's firing. So people are taking different microdoses of different psychedelics, and we can see the exact impact on the brain. It's not a guesswork anymore. In the 60s, when the hippies were doing it, they're just, throwing in some quaaludes or some substances or some speed, and they're like analog, seeing what the impact was. But now we have an incredibly granular visibility, and we have a feedback loop. And so now we can get it right down to the right dosages, and it's a profound possibilities that are coming there. And the question then is, what do we want to do with it? What would you do with that capability? The big trap is to constantly be in a psychedelic state, which would be the addiction model where we try and go.
Absolutely. One of the questions that we had in the questions when people signed up was, we're seeing a lot of startups now. The news is talking about many startups laying people off because they don't have businesses that actually have a business model. We've got, the WeWorks, etc. of the world. So the question was, is there business behind exponential organizations?
You mean, is there a business behind it?
Yes, that was the question.
Okay, let me give you the core economic thesis of EXOs, which I think is really important here. When you're running a business, we worry about demand and supply, and specifically the cost of demand, the cost of supply. Hopefully you're on the right side of that equation. What the internet did when it came along, it allowed us to drop our cost of demand exponentially. Online marketing, referral marketing, every Silicon Valley company is trying for a viral loop. And so that's a huge breakthrough because we could drop the cost of demand. And you saw an explosion in one wave of startups like the Googles and Amazons and Yahoos, et cetera, taking advantage of the low cost of demand. But what EXOs have figured out is, how do you drop the cost of supply exponentially? Okay, so think about Airbnb. The marginal cost of adding a room to their inventory is pretty much zero. Whereas if you're Hyatt, you have to build a hotel. And so now, same with Waze, same with Uber, et cetera, you've dropped the exponential cost of supply. Now, if you have low cost of supply, you take out the denominator, your market cap explodes. And so this is a massive breakthrough in business in general, which now means that in every industry, entrepreneurs can enter a legacy environment with no cost of supply, and this totally disrupts that industry. And we will basically see now the fundamental transformation of business. The blockchain is open source and free, and it totally takes out retail banking in about a decade or so. The cost of running a branch or the centralized ledger and all the enormous security simply doesn't hold up. And so huge opportunities there. I'm going to touch on one other aspect that I see in the questions that I think is very important, like UBI, Universal Basic Income. We're pretty clear that we're going to get to that point, that you have universal basic income where fundamentally the amount of productivity delivered by technology is so high that we basically don't need to work for a living. And this sounds crazy, but if you went back 1,000 years ago, we were all working 20 hours a day in fields to put 3 meals on the table. We've shrunk steadily the amount of time needed to earn a livable wage. In France, it's legally 35 hours in theory. But that will drop more and more to go to near zero and cross over. Now the challenge is, how do you go from a job, union, taxation, labor, employment construct to this UBI thing? Is such a huge leap politically. We have no confidence in our political structures of getting there. One of the most successful UBI experiments was run in Canada, and it was so successful that the government realized that it doesn't need us at all and shut it down. And so this is kind of tragic because government wants to be useful, and therefore they actually shut down the UBI, which was phenomenally powerful. So we think we'll get there. The question is, how will we get there?
Absolutely. So Alex is just asking, how do we efficiently work with immune systems that are really trying to discredit new technologies?
Yeah, this is unfortunate. Let me give a data point that you can all use to deal with people that go, oh my God, these new technologies are really dangerous, okay? There was a really interesting study done on Craigslist and eBay, etc., where on Craigslist or eBay, for the first time in human history, I can do a positive transaction or a fraudulent transaction just as easily, right? On eBay, I can pretend to sell you a MacBook, I collect the money, and I'm off with the money. How do we protect against that, etc.? But now we can see human nature at scale because I can easily do a constructive or fraudulent transaction. So anthropologists and sociologists started studying these systems and saying, okay, we have for the first time the opportunity to do good or bad equally. I can mask my email address quite easily. What's the actual ratio? And it turns out the actual ratio of positive to negative transactions on eBay or Craigslist is about 8,000 to 1. Okay? So on eBay, there are 8,000 positive transactions to each negative. This is an unbelievable thing. That means if we have a new technology like drones or CRISPR or whatever, our current thought is ban the technology until we figure it out. And then it takes forever for society to take benefit. What we should be doing is saying, just let anybody do anything, deliver beer with drones, etc., and police the negative use cases, and society would benefit massively, right? And so that's where I think we need to go. What we've been increasingly doing is yelling at governments to start adopting that from a policy perspective, and the idea that they can compete better if they're more proactive with regulatory.
Cool, yeah, absolutely. Gustavo says, should we start by teaching people to be exponential people in order to have exponential organizations?
It would help. I think we have generational change. I think of anybody under 12 years, any kid under 12 years old is naturally exponential. In fact, they're not even human. If you have a 12-year-old or under kid, they're not really human. That's a different species altogether. They've grown up natively digital in a way that we simply don't understand. And I can tell a very funny story about that, but I don't think we have the time here. I think we do need that education, that mindset shift of really, really understanding the linear to exponential transition. And there's a bunch of analogs, the grains of rice on a chessboard, etc. But there's no better way, I think, than to go to a 3D printing lab and actually design some object and print it. And when you see I can take an idea from my mind and at almost zero cost, make it realizable, that's a profound, profound comment. I'll give you a little example of a breakthrough idea. Was Saul Griffith from Other Labs. They've come up with a solar-powered car, which is a car with just a big solar panel and a battery in it. This car goes about 4,000 miles a year, completely on solar power, completely decentralized. You don't even need to plug it in. And something like 90% of trips are about 4,000 miles a year or less commuting locally. So you could actually distribute this car and never use any energy from a grid ever. And you don't even ever have to plug it in. Just think of the implications of just that is a very, very profound point. And so this is the opportunity. Somebody in the comments is saying, read The Price of Tomorrow by Jeff Booth. It's kind of a staggering book. Jeff is a very good friend of ours, and really worth it, looking at the macroeconomic implications and why the entire economic structure will collapse soon. But again, fairly dramatic.
Yeah. Gerardo has made a few comments about, okay, this is great, but how do we actually leverage all these amazing people we have in our community to actually go out and solve these, these problems?
So we've gone through several phases, right? Number one was build a community that was sizable enough. And I think once we get to about 2,000 or so trained consultants that are certified in EXO, we'll have the critical mass necessary to really go do something huge in the world. The second is by open sourcing the tool sets. The EXO Sprint is now open sourced via the Exponential Transformation book. The Fast Track Sprint, which is in cities, is not quite open source yet. We need probably 2 more cranks to get it perfect before we can open source it and understand it fully. There's some huge opportunities coming via the Romanian, for those of you who know that story. We're just getting our ducks in a row on the platform side before we open it up to opportunities coming from the outside. For example, I was in Brazil, and they're saying, hey, you helped transform the Colombia justice system. We're way bigger and more corrupt, for God's sakes, get over here. And so we have to kind of very carefully pick where we start. The ideal world, though, is really to get to a point where we have opportunities coming in that go straight to the community, and then we can step out of the way. Right now, we're generating some opportunities. The one that we'll start off with, hopefully this in the next 48 hours, is the reboot of starting the 2nd edition of EXO. And I want to run that in the community with all the people in the EXO community, because it'll just be better that way. And then we can use that as a model of how do we run an entire project in the community. And then as more projects come in, we will take that learning and distribute it that way.
Yeah, and absolutely. And what I'd just say to that is we definitely are seeing more and more folks within the platform collaborating together, discussing things, working together, which truly is amazing. We have a number of different community members who are running businesses, working with organizations, whether they are small, large, cities, states, and it's really amazing to see what's happening. So if you're interested in doing that, the thing is you need to plug in. Find the people whose MTPs resonate with yours and really get things moving. I don't know if there actually are any further questions. There is one question here asking about a use case repository. Is there somewhere where we can see like use cases? And we are continuing to drive and build things. If you are interested in a change in the platform, or there's something that you think that the platform doesn't have, please go to the OpenExO platform circle and tell us about it so that we can improve it.
Let me give 2 examples. Let me mention 3 things real quick. One is we've kind of made a decision as we get into the 2nd edition of EXO that we'll do this more publicly. So what I think we'll do is start a podcast or public kind of webinar setup like this, and just interview and have a series of conversations that are public, and that becomes the 2nd edition. Because this kind of conversation is the best way of really gleaning out wisdom in a group setting. So I think we'll kind of use this kind of public conversation as a stream for this. I think number 2, I want to give you 2 examples that you can all use if you want so choose. And I know we're really late on time. One is the company GitHub. GitHub went from 0 over about a 9-year period, a platform where software developers can collaborate. Microsoft bought this company for $7.5 billion. And what's really incredible is this company has pretty much 0 workforce, 0 intellectual property, 0 assets. And it just, if you talk to an accountant and just say, this happened, they'll just go, what do you put on the balance sheet? And their brain breaks, right? And if you're not building one of those, what are you doing? And so you have the unbelievable opportunity to create incredible value in a profound way today. And I think it is our mandate and our obligation to actually do it, because we need to get this done. And I think we kind of push this consultant certification because we need that army of people ready, so that as we kind of start getting into this, we'll really go. We're going to aim for transforming mayors, and we have a nominal project starting in a couple of months with 10 mayors in 3 megacity mayors like Bangkok, Manila, others, 3 medium-sized cities, 3 small cities around the world, and we want to start creating small armies of people in those cities.
Yeah. So we have just hit the top of the hour, the bottom of the hour here in India. And it's really great. Thanks so much, Salim. Thank you to everybody who's on the call, who's joined in. If you want to continue these conversations, you can do so in the platform. The platform is there. You can also, if there were questions that weren't answered, I ask that you ask those in the platform. Go to the community circle, ask the question, say, hey, the webinar happened, I didn't get my question answered. And we can then, look at answering those questions together with everybody in the community. So a massive thank you to everybody for joining. We will be sending out a recording. People have asked for the slides. Yes, we will be sending those out. So it'll most likely be in an email after this, as well as on the platform, just the links. So thanks everybody. Really great to see you all, and looking forward to continuing to transform the world for a better future throughout this year that is the start of a decade of EXOs. So thanks everybody.
Kevin, thank you for hosting and all of the work in putting this together. So God bless. All right, folks,
Awesome.
Talk soon. Have a great week.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.